to Mary Jane Markets. My name is Mo Rahim, and today is July 23rd, 2021. This is a podcast report on the news of the North American cannabis sector and to offer my analysis. I've been following and investing in the sector for years and want to create a source that strips out the signal from the noise for investors specifically. So today we're going to be talking about an upcoming Ohio Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee meeting, more information on Amazon lobbying for cannabis, a cultivation update from New York, the June Canadian sales figures, and a third-party report on the Michigan cannabis market. Let's start by taking a look at the market today. If I can get to the right image. The sector down around 2%, while the broader market overall was up around 1%. I didn't see any news for the very minor sell-off today, but like we talked about in the very first episode, this isn't uncommon for this sector. A nice opportunity to add to positions if you wish. All right, so jumping into our first topic here. A meeting notice announced yesterday from Ohio's Marijuana Advisory Committee meeting regarding their next meeting to be held on August 12th. So on their news page here, they usually have these meeting notices, but if we click here, this notice is pretty sparse. Look, this is the whole thing. It doesn't have an agenda, but maybe that's something they'll inform us about closer to the date. If we hop over here to the last notice for the meeting that they held in June, does contain more information like the topics of discussion, which we can see here, things like updates about the program, including sales and dispensary application requests. So it looks like there are some topics that might be relevant to investors discussed at these meetings. Now this one here in June was a virtual meeting over Microsoft Teams, and this upcoming one is in person. So maybe that's the reason for the switch up here. But even if we can't join live, the advisory committee's website holds materials from previous meetings, as you can see here, for us to review. And this includes things like meeting minutes and presentations. As a reminder, Ohio is medicinal only, and dispensaries really started opening up only last year, and they have a nice map on their website currently showing only 52 dispensaries in the state. There we go, move the screen share around so you can see that a little bit better. So you can see this is pretty sparse coverage across this state. And investors should pay attention to these types of government meetings where they might announce more licenses and who will be getting those. If you're invested in companies that are operating in the state, for example, like Cresco Labs, that would be important news. Things like this are due diligence into getting a sense if the legal market is continuing to grow or stalling. So I'll link all this below and keep you updated as we get closer to that August 12th date. Speaking of meetings, like we talked about on Monday, Georgia's Medical Cannabis Commission is holding a special meeting tomorrow, Saturday, July 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to discuss their MMJ licenses. Georgia is a MMJ only, low THC only state, but we'll see what kind of interest they have from companies trying to get a footprint in the state. Looks like they did update this page with a live stream link, so I'll link it below. You can tune in and root for your favorite to grab one of these 6 production licenses. All right, moving on to our next topic. I really didn't think I was going to be talking about Amazon on this podcast this much, but we have a little more information about the internal talks around the lobbying decision we've talked about for the last couple of days. This is an article that came out a few days ago from Politico, so I'm sorry that I'm just seeing it now. In it, they report that Amazon has met with a number of advocacy and industry groups, including the Drug Policy Alliance, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and surprisingly, Canopy Growth. Now, the way that this paragraph and the broader article is written, their sources on this seem to be these groups themselves, and I'm taking that at face value. While everything else in here is stuff that we've already covered in the last 2 episodes, the part that did stick out to me was this quote from Maritza Perez. She's the director of the Office of National Affairs at the Drug Policy Alliance, one of the groups that they met with. She says, "They didn't tell me anything about wanting to get in sales or anything. I did express the fact that they're a big corporation and that people may think that they're doing this for other reasons, and they understand that this might be the perception." So no definitive confirmation or indication as to the motive behind the lobbying efforts, though this quote implies that the motive is not financial, but I think Amazon is smartly playing this one close to the chest. So I still don't have a read here, but that's exactly what a mature player like Amazon wants. The degree of covertness utilized here sort of makes me want to lean toward the financial motive side. A behemoth of a company needs to expand into other large sectors to continue growing. I'm sure if you take a moment to reflect on that, you can think of other non-e-commerce businesses they and other large companies have entered into in the past. So this is something I'll continue to keep an eye on and report on until we get a better sense of whether this is a PR move or a bottom line move. Here's why you should care about Amazon getting into the cannabis game. Aside from them being a very powerful lobbying force in DC to try and get something passed, this isn't the first time Amazon has ventured into a new space. We can go back to 2018. Here's an article from TechCrunch. When Amazon and others wanted to get into the healthcare business, we saw that stocks in competitors, namely CVS, United Health, Express Scripts, Cigna, immediately went down following the announcement with quite some big moves. I'll just read this here. CVS dropped by just over 4% by midday. United Health plunged a whopping 11.5%. Express Scripts was off by 3.6%. Cigna was down just under 7%, and Walgreens fell by 2.6%. Amazon is definitely a disruptor. No matter how late into the game they enter or how mature of a market they are entering, they're going to cause some shakeup. So you can tell I'm equally humored and flabbergasted by the influence of this one company. Okay, this isn't an Amazon podcast. Let's move on to something closer to home field. That's a report by BizNow on the stalling New York cannabis cultivation space. So they're reporting on delays in cultivation licenses in the Empire State, and that is because of appointees to the Cannabis Control Board in the state being unconfirmed. The state's Congress ended their session at the end of June without voting on these appointments, so any official business, such as setting regulations and deciding who gets licenses that would fall to that board, are potentially delayed until they reconvene in 2022. Except, as BizNow says, barring a special session. Here is the session calendar I found on their website with days where the legislature is in session marked in blue, but no link to 2022, so when that will be, I don't know. More than half a year seems like a really long time, though, to leave this board empty, but New York politics isn't my strong suit. So if you have any insights into that, feel free to share with us in the comments. What does this mean? Well, this is kind of great for the 10 operator licenses in New York that have already been issued. With new licenses on hold, these operators comprise the totality of the legal market, and they're getting an even bigger head start. I'll link this below. You'll find the usual suspects or that they've been bought up by one of them. But if you're invested in one of these companies, this is somewhat good news for the time being. I say somewhat because in the long run, what's best is we have a growing and efficient marketplace. All right, next up we have May sales numbers for Canada. Not sure why these are always 2 months delayed, but Canada comes in at $313 million in sales for the month of May 2021. That is Canadian dollars, and that's about 250 million US dollars. This article from New Cannabis Ventures has a nice breakdown of the totals here. If you want to look, like usual, I'll link it below. But if you've been listening to my previous episodes, you know how I've harped about if you're only invested in Canadian LPs and not US operators, that you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And numbers like these clearly show why. Just compare these with the other states we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks, and of course, take into account other factors like our pricing discussion and federal laws, but the long-term winners are clear to me. Lastly, let's talk about a report from the Anderson Economic Group commissioned by the Michigan Cannabis Manufacturers Association on Michigan's cannabis market, which went fully recreational in 2020. So this is a really short report at 2 pages, not disparaging AEG here, but it was written for a specific audience and it's more like an executive summary. They hit on a lot of broad topics, things like cannabis use, which they say 1 in 5 Michigan residents used in 2020. Unfortunately, there are no footnotes for or statistics like these. Footnotes for these statistics, but for this chart here that goes back 10 years, they cite the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. If you listen to my first episode on the market landscape, I talked about why surveys aren't the best gauge for this. Things like people probably aren't answering honestly on stigmatized topics, especially in these prior years when there was a lot more stigma and it wasn't part of the national conversation. 75% growth here in the last 10 years seems really high to me. Probably more like 75% growth in respondents willing to admit it now. And I'm not sure where they got this 1 in 5 number, but that's pretty close to my estimation of 22.5% that we talked about in the first episode. So I'm hoping this was from official state sources. That would give me a lot more confidence in my bottom-up estimation. I sent AEG a message to follow up on what their source was, so I'll let you know if they respond. Some other things that they cover in this report are sales and tax revenues. Also, some really interesting metrics I haven't seen anywhere before are drive times for residents of Michigan. So it looks like around 80% live 20 minutes away from a dispensary, 95% live 30 minutes away, and 99 within 60 minutes. Excuse me, not away. I should have said within. Those statistics are for within a driving time. And then they determine the total market. Apologies, I had to adjust my screen again so you could see the bottom there. So they go about determining the total market. That's both the legal and illegal market to be 3.1 billion in 2020. Go back over to my spreadsheets. My estimation for the state of Michigan here. All right, I had to adjust that up again, but my estimation for the state of Michigan is around 3.8 billion. So if not within the same ballpark, it's in the same neighborhood. If you're interested in learning more about this market spreadsheet and how I came to these figures, be sure to check out my first episode. It's kind of long, but there's a lot of good info in there. All right, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I think as we roll into the August earnings season, a lot of discussion is going to shift from market topics to companies. As of now, I'm only planning on covering 4 companies: Trulieve, Cresco Labs, Green Thumb Industries, and Curaleaf. Full disclosure, I am long in all of those companies. and they're the ones I know best, so that's why I'm starting with them. I certainly can't cover every company in the space, but I'm planning to add some of the more popular ones to that list, as well as any others I'm interested in. I don't want to get it too long though and introduce a lot of noise to the show. It's going to be hard to track, hard to cover. But that's it for today. My Patreon is patreon.com/Mary Jane Markets, so feel free to check that out. But all I really ask at this time is that you share this podcast out with people that you think will find it helpful or interesting. I don't really have any way of growing this besides word of mouth. You can find me on Twitter at MJ Markets. That's the best place to contact me. You can also send me an email at maryjanemarkets@gmail.com. Thank you.